Kat, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. There you go. I got to put it in the camera so I can see it. Thank you, man. Okay. I had some stuff I was thinking about as I came in. Do you guys know loud so they can hear you?
You mean redlining contracts with a lawyer redlines?
No, but it's a good. We can. What do I want to say? We can cross that out as my intention. Yeah, I know you know. All right. Let's hear you say it loud.
It's just pushing it to the map.
No, it's not it either. Okay, I thought with your financial background. Redlining, in the context I'm intending it, and I think you guys should have figured it out just because of current affairs. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the former U.S. president, to get us out of the Great Depression, he came up with something called the New Deal in the early 30s. You guys are familiar with the Great American Depression? My family lived through the Great Depression. My grandfather fought for money. He was a prize fighter in the Great Depression. That's how he put food on the table. And things got tough. Like when I would go to visit my relatives, this would have been in the 70s and 80s when I was a wee lad. I'd go and visit my relatives, and my great-grandmother, who spoke no English, despite living in the country for 50 years at that point, not a lick of English. She was a Slav, and so she came over. She's Serbian. She came over. Kind of like World War I, in the aftermath of World War I, she came over. She used to eat, like my family would cook meat, that was our culture growing up. So there'd be like a roast, which is a section of an animal, a section of a cow. And she would eat the grizzle, which is like leftover fat. Do you follow? I mean, if you're from Mexico, you understand what I'm talking about. But I don't know if the rest of you do. Do you know what I'm talking about? So you cook a roast, and then there'd be this grizzle left on the side of the plate. And nobody eats that. It's not considered to be, the whole thing is not edible. The whole thing is not meant for human consumption. But within people who eat things not meant for human consumption, that portion of people don't eat it in this country. It's considered to be grotesque, and it's meant to be discarded. But my grandma would, like my great-grandma, my baba, she would chomp away at it. And it grossed me out. Like I didn't want to eat at the table with her. It grossed me out. Even when I was eating meat 30 plus years ago as a kid, it would gross me out. And so I asked my grandma, like, what's why are you letting, was she demented or something? Like, why is she eating the grizzle? And my grandma said, well, we lived through the Great Depression, and there was nothing to eat. And so she used to eat fat sandwiches, large sandwiches. Like that's what we had to eat to grow up. And so even though it's been over for 50 years, she doesn't ever leave anything on the plate or the tray. And so because she knows we won't eat that, she eats it because she can't bear to see food go to waste because there was so much famine at home and then in the U.S. during the Great Depression. Heavy, right? Yay or nay? You know, like my grandma, like they had to like wipe their backside with newspaper. There was no toilet paper. They used newspaper because they couldn't afford toilet paper. They ate large sandwiches because they couldn't afford anything else. I mean, and my grandfather fought for cash, like on the table. You look at his knuckles and you look at his face, and it's like he'd like been through, you know, hundreds of wars to put food on the table. It was heavy. It was heavy. People were dying of starvation. There were some crazy droughts that went on during that time too. Like weird. It was like people thought it was the end of the world. They thought the biblical apocalypse was upon us because everything went to hell and then it stopped raining. And huge portions of the Midwestern U.S. became desolate, the breadbasket of America, and crops wouldn't grow, and there was massive crop failures, and people were dying of starvation. Stuff doesn't happen in the U.S. anymore. It does happen in other parts of the world. 10 million people are on the brink of starvation in Yemen today. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but there's a massive humanitarian crisis going on in Yemen right now. There's a civil war that broke out, but then there's also, they shut down the ports, and so they can't get any food in, and people are freaking out. 400,000 kids about to die of starvation, 10 million people about to go in famine mode. And then massive cholera broke out. And then the coronavirus hit. And so it happens like this sometimes, where like bad stuff will happen one after another and you can't get your bearings. It's like the hits keep coming. And things go from bad to worse. Half their hospitals are non-functioning. Can't get clean drinking water. Millions of people can't get clean drinking water there. Anyway, and actually, while this was happening in the U.S., kind of the same thing was happening in Russia. You're Ukrainian, right?
Russian.
You're Russian. Okay. There was a massive drought also in 1932-33, like around the same time in Russia, and millions of people died. Crops failed. Millions of people died. It was happening in both countries, in the U.S. and also it was happening in Russia. There was a whole 5-year plan that Lenin had embarked on. I don't know how familiar you guys are with history, but the Bolsheviks took over in 1917 or something like that, and they became the Communist Party, and they started systematically collectivizing the country, and they hated on a group of farmers called the kulaks. The kulaks was anybody who owned more than 8 acres of land and had, more cows and more animals than the rest of the people in the surrounding area than their neighbors. And when they first started collectivizing wealth and power in Russia, they left some of the agrarian people out of the mix, and they let them have a little bit of cottage industry. They wanted to command the main portions of industry, what was later called the commanding heights of industry. Copper, steel, and oil, and things like that, but they left some of the agrarian stuff up to the local people, and some of the people were good farmers, and they became more wealthy compared to their neighbors. And at a certain point, Lenin decided he didn't like the kulaks, and he ordered them to be wiped out as a class, because within the peasants, they were kind of like high-class peasants, because they had more than the lower-class peasants. And Lenin got upset at them for some political reasons, and he ordered them to be wiped out, and millions of them were killed. But they were the farmers. And so then tons of crops failed, and then millions more people died. And you're looking at like 10 million people who died from this. I mean, it's not small. It's the genocide of the Jews and all the others of World War II, happened in the 30s in Russia. Mao blew it also in his Great Leap Forward in the 60s, and 20 million Chinese people died. This whole crop thing, and like when people want to go communist and collectivize, and they take it out of the hands of the people who've managed that cottage industry for centuries. I mean, when you go in the Himalayas, you're watching that steppe farming going on. When we're deep in the mountains, you see the steppe farming. The best basmati rice in the world grows up in the Himalayas. It's like this long. It's ridiculous. It's unbelievable. And it's because it doesn't sit. Rice normally sits in water. You flood the fields, and then the rice soaks up the water, but it makes the grain a little shorter and fatter. But if you have continuously running water going across it, then that doesn't happen. In the Himalayas, with the steppe farming, you get the water coming, and it cascades down and hits each of the steps, and there's always running water going across the grains, and they grow very long, and there's a very aromatic flavor. Most of that rice is shipped out to the Middle East. You can get it if you know where to shop, but even in India, it's practically unavailable. But you can get these grains of basmati rice, they're like that long. And it's unbelievable. It's almost like looking at vermicelli noodles or something like that. These people have an ancient technology. You look at those steppe farms, they're thousands of years old. You look at the walls, some of those walls are 500 to 1,000 years old. They're made out of stones. There's nothing else keeping them together. There's no cement. You see it, entire mountainsides. It's stuff that takes hundreds of years to do. You can't just throw somebody else in there and they make it work. There's something about like having a feel for the soil and being of the soil and understanding soil and how it works. Anyway, so FDR came up with the New Deal, which was designed to pull us out and give us safety net for people. They came up with Social Security, which essentially is security for old people. Social Security is for old people. You invest in it when you're young, you get compounding interest on it, and then when you're old and you can't work anymore, the government pays you back that money that they've safeguarded for you, and then you're able to live at the end of your life without falling into poverty and debt and dying a premature death. And especially as the average age of people that they die at goes up, then such things are extremely important. If everybody's croaking at the age of 40 or something like that, it's not that big of a deal. When people are living in their 70s, as they are now, then having this cushion, having a safety net when you're old. Anyway, so FDR established that, Social Security. They also got money in the immediate time, because people were investing in it. It was taken out of their paycheck, so they got money immediately, and then it bought the government some time to rebuild things. He built a ton of dams. He built a ton of infrastructure roads. Many of the roads of this country were created during that time. He gave jobs to a ton of people. And he also redid the way that homes were bought. In 1930, 30% of the U.S. population owned their own home. By 1960, 60% of the U.S. population owned their own home. And how that happened was this. It used to be to buy a house, you had to have a huge down payment, 30, 40% even, of the money to buy the home. And then you had a 5 or a 10-year loan to pay it off. So buying a home was like buying a car, but even more difficult because there was a massive down payment, which you don't even need for a car nowadays. But you had like 5 years, 10 max, to pay off your entire home. This made it very difficult for the middle class to ever buy, which meant they were perpetually caught in the cycle of being a renter. And they didn't have this ability to build wealth, this kind of traditional, very blue-collar way of building wealth. We were raised that it was a very blue-collar way of building wealth. Generations prior to me, my grandparents were not raised like that. It was a luxury item that very few could afford. Anyway, FDR established the FHA, the Federal Housing Authority, and they made 30-year loans, 30-year amortized loans with no more than 10% down. That model we have for what it means to buy a home, that you put 10% down and you get a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, and they amortize the loan over 30 years, that traditional model that your parents would have used or that my parents would have used or that we learn if you study the housing market at all. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? That model came about in the 30s. The government regulated that. They dropped insurance rates, they stepped in, and they regulated the industry. And everything changed. And the FHA guaranteed and insured those loans so the banks would be forced to give the money, and they had some assurance that they would be paid back instead of a default. And so the banks weren't just instructed what to do, but the Fed had to jump in and guarantee the loan. Do you follow? But they would only guarantee the loan in neighborhoods which were deemed to be insurable. And those neighborhoods on a map were marked in green. And the neighborhoods which were deemed uninsurable, they were marked in red. And that's the redlining I'm talking about. And those neighborhoods that were marked in red across every municipality in this country, where the FHA decided we'll insure those loans, therefore 30-year, fixed rate, amortized mortgage, 10% down, but we won't insure the loans here, therefore you can do whatever you want to do, and the banks are in charge of that, and it's privatized, and we're not going to get involved. Those lines, if you look across our fair nation, you find that those red lines are drawn, and they were drawn for 40 years, right smack dab over the top of where black people lived. Did you follow this? What that meant was that black people were forced to buy houses on contract. They were forced to take a contract loan. They gave money down to pay their rent every month. They had these horrible contracts negotiated with exorbitant rates of interest. And if they missed one payment, they would forfeit their deposit and all of their payments up till now, and they were renting to own, but they only had the house put in their name when their final payment was made. The owners of the home, the banks, could demand additional payments. They had to pay for all the fixes to their homes so the homes could be put in terrible disrepair, and the prices they put those homes at were they were double over what they were purchased for. So they sold your home at double the market value, force you to pay ridiculous rates of interest, and then put you into a contract where you didn't have even a little bit of wiggle room. Where if you missed a single payment, they would foreclose on your home, take it back, and it wasn't even like a foreclosure like we imagine, where you were given months and months and this and that, and they had to evict you. It wasn't like that back then. And they took over, and you're out on the street. And it was big business. They would sell the same home half a dozen times to people and foreclose on them over and over and over again. And if you lost your job or you hit a bump in the road or something like that and you couldn't make your payment, you were done. And everything you'd invested up to that point was gone. And a lot of these people who were buying these homes in the North were escaping lynchings and incredible Jim Crow discrimination in the South. And they weren't, the most shrewd business people. They were just coming out of an agrarian lifestyle, and they got trapped in these loans before they knew what hit them, because it's all they could qualify for. And they were perpetually caught in a cycle of poverty based on the color of their skin. That's redlining. It was outlawed in 1968, shortly before I was born. It still goes on to this day, but it has to be real DL. People get arrested for it and sent to jail for it. But it was definitely still around in the 70s. It took a couple of decades to kind of, bleed it out of people's systems. But up until 68, it was legal. People had to freak out, and it was part of the civil rights movement, actually, is what happened. Just after a lot of the civil rights movement, they realized the just inherent inhumanity of this, and they switched it up. That's redlining. Obviously, redlining can mean a bunch of different things. It can be copywriting. It can be just a general statement about pushing things to the red, like on the car or something like that, taking it to the limit, more generally conceived of. But redlining in the way it's used in a socio-political context, refers to this phenomenon that took place, where the government actually got involved in discrimination. The federal government got involved in discriminating against black people and robbed yet another generation of their wealth after countless generations before them had been robbed. Did you know about this? You didn't, yeah. Okay. The thing is, it's like wealth is largely generational. You pass on your wealth to your children, and then they don't start from zero. They start from 10 or 20 or 50 or 60. They start ahead because you fought to get ahead. Like my grandma was a real estate agent, the daughter of the grizzle eater that I mentioned before, my Baba. And she worked, it wasn't like a high-class job or something like that, but she lived frugally her whole life so she could leave my parents a bunch of money. I mean, she suffered. And she lived incredibly frugally and put money away every week, every month, every year for her entire life, and lived largely a life of self-abnegation so that she could give my parents something. That's how it was. Wealth is largely generational. It's passed on, and the next generation, they get a leg up. They're not starting from zero. You follow? That redlining process robbed a couple of generations of their wealth. And we're just one generation out of that. Which means there's no wealth to inherit. It's not starting from zero. They're starting from zero. They're not starting ahead. There's no building. There's no critical mass which their parents put together for them. And so this kind of, this New Deal was not a deal for the black folks. In fact, a bunch of people made their money by exploiting the black community. So you've got like slavery, and then you've got our penal system, which made an exception. You could force labor if the people were in jail. So you put people in jail, put a bunch of black people in jail, make them labor for you. Then you got the Jim Crow laws, which create that sharecropping situation. I don't want to get into the whole sharecropping thing, but it's a whole other form of indentured servitude it's largely been outlawed now, but it created a monopoly. Anyway, it would be too much to get into it right now. And then people escaped the sharecropping, and then they got caught in this. It was like generation after generation. We found out a way to force black people to toil and enrich others while not being able to build any forward momentum themselves. Did you guys follow this? I was listening to a black man in Chicago, and he was saying, I just feel like such a fool. He's in his 90s now. He's like, I feel like such a fool. I escaped the sharecropping in the South. He was from Mississippi. And I moved up to the North to make a way for myself and my family. And I got ripped off yet again. And I'm embarrassed that I got caught in an on-contract loan. I feel like a fool because I got ripped off twice. And so I don't even like to talk about it because it's so humiliating for me as a man that I got like swindled yet again. You follow? Okay. I read an interesting argument a while back. It's very seductive to say, like for me, I can be like, hey man, my family came over recently. Like all these crimes committed against black people, my family came over recently. It's not my problem. I just got here. You follow? On the surface, prima facie, that seems like a reasonable argument. Thing is, although my family came over recently, I derived tremendous benefit from being a citizen of the United States of America. I didn't fight for that. I didn't fight for the freedom of speech I enjoy. I didn't fight for the social net I enjoy. That was just largely given to me because people prior to me had set the whole country up hundreds of years before. So I landed here, we got citizenship, and all of a sudden I got all these great rights, and I'm born into a pretty good social contract. You guys familiar with social contract theory? Social contract theory is the formalization of somebody like John Locke and others thinking it through and pointing out an undeniable reality about civilization. When you are born into a given civilization, you don't ask for it, but you get certain rights. In this country, it's the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The right to bear arms, freedom of speech. These are rights that we get just by being born here. We don't have to fight for them. We don't have to apply for them. They just come automatically. And there's a certain way we pay for those rights. We have to follow laws. We don't get to choose our laws. Laws against murder and all sorts of things, those are chosen for us. We don't get to say, I don't agree to that law. Sorry, you're born in this country. You get these rights without asking. You get streets to drive on. You get stop signs. You get medical facilities. People complain all they want about our terrible medical system and how it's broken. Hey man, go to a third world country. Go to India. I've gotten jacked up in India in the middle of nowhere, and there was nothing. I've gotten injured in the middle of nowhere in India. There was like nothing. Like there's no hospitals. There's no nothing. You go in India to a hospital, and you don't have money to pay, you don't get any treatment. That's it. Like they take your money before they treat you. That never happens in the U.S. They grind you from the beginning. Give me your insurance card, which Social Security number. They start grinding you from the minute you go in there, but they don't deny you treatment. You walk in the emergency room, and they put you. They bring you back to life, and they gouge you after the fact. We can complain about our healthcare system all we want, and it's like maybe compared to Western Europe or Australia, we're just a joke. But you go down to South America, you go down to Latin America, and you go most other places in the world, and you pay to play. You're born in this country, you won the lottery. Black, white, or Mexican. You're an illegal alien? I mean, I'm looking at you, I'm sorry. I apologize. I apologize. You're an illegal alien, you walk into an emergency room, guess what happens? La Migra shows up, right? No. They take care of you. So the least likely place for you to get bothered by immigration officers is in a hospital. It's a no-fly zone. You show up in this country, no matter how you got here, you go to an emergency room, they take care of you. I know there's some reading about, but I also know because I've done it. I've taken people who are illegal in this country, illegal aliens in this country, to the emergency room and watched their magic at work. I've been broke and gone to the emergency room and had them work magic on me. You're born in this country, you won the lottery. Compared to most of the rest of the world. We get all these things given to us automatically just by taking birth here or just by showing up here, just by getting here. However you got here. Hop the fence, whatever, it doesn't make a difference. If you're here, we take care of you. Roads. A police force. The police force here, might do some bad stuff occasionally. 28 unarmed people were killed in 2019. 28 unarmed people were killed in 2019. 28 people were killed last week in Chicago. Last weekend. On the streets. You go to other countries, man, it's like, it's no joke. The cops are complicit. I mean, they're doing some bad stuff. I mean, they had to federalize multiple times the Mexican police force. Finally, the National Guard now serves as the police because they can't work with the hundreds of thousands of police officers in Mexico, 350,000 police officers. They can't even begin to touch it. There's so much bribery. Everyone wants their mordida. Every cop in Mexico wants his bite. The whole place is corrupt. It's so systemic. In India, you regularly bribe the police. It's just common. It's normal. It's normative. I bribe police officers in India and in Mexico. I've never even asked to do that in this country. It's so clear that that's not going to get me anything. But in other countries, it's like, that's just what it is. You throw a little money around, it's like, it's okay, no problem. If you don't give them money, then they throw the book at you. You get worse than what you would get. It's so systemic in the culture that if you don't pay the bribe, you're unusual and strange, and you get singled out for special treatment. It's not even like it's a 0 and you can get +1. 0 is paying the bribe. You follow? Really, it's +1 or -1. There is no 0. That's the point. You either pay the bribe and you get a +1, or you don't pay the bribe and you get a -1. There is no 0. There is no just, I'm a law-abiding citizen, just give me the regular. The regular is not on the menu. Anyway, you're born in this country, you get tremendous benefits just by being born in this country. If you don't think that's the case, you just haven't traveled. Maybe you went to London or Paris or something like that. That doesn't work. Hang in Africa for a bit. Go to India. Go deep down south. Not even that deep down south, to be honest. Baja California's got one of the worst crime rates in all of Mexico. It's a border state. All the bad stuff goes through there, so it's also incredibly dangerous. Social contract theory is you get a bunch of stuff just by being born here, just by showing up here. But then you got to pay for it. We tax you. We tell you these are the rules, and you don't get to choose the rules you want to follow and the rules you don't want to follow. You can say, I don't want to pay for that tax. I don't want to pay for this tax. It doesn't work like that. That's social contract. There's an automatic contract that you sign simply by being in that country. That you get certain rights and you pay for them in certain ways. Certain of your freedoms are curtailed and certain of your freedoms are guaranteed, and you just get that automatically without ever asking for it. That's social contract theory. It's not actually a theory. It's the way the entire world works and the way civilization has worked ever since it first began. Somebody just bothered to put a name on it and notice it, like the law of gravity, which was already extant. Somebody just discovered it. They didn't invent it. It was discovered, not invented. You guys understand? Somehow we have two social contracts in this country, one for black people and one for white people. And that's problematic. If you show up in this country and you enjoy the benefits of being in this country, then you also take on the responsibilities. Like if you want to get your inheritance from somebody, you take on their debt as well as their assets. You follow? You don't get to choose to just take their assets and not take their debts. It's a package deal. You can deny the inheritance if it's a negative inheritance. But if you take on somebody's portfolio and you inherit their estate, you inherit both their debts as well as their assets. And the only reason you accept that is if at the end of the day you wound up with more than you had to pay. And so if you're in this country and you get the benefits of being in this country, you should also take responsibility for cleaning up the messes in this country. That's fair. Therefore, saying you just got here 5 minutes ago doesn't count. You want to take the benefits of being here. You also have to take the responsibilities of being here as well. Do you guys follow this? Do you follow this? You don't have to agree with me. I'm just asking if you follow what I'm saying. Okay. All right. So essentially I'm making the point that to say I just got here, you know how you guys like to say that? Not my country, I just got here? Doesn't work like that.
I'm not going to say that anymore.
Huh?
I'm not going to say that anymore.
You don't get to say that. You get it? It's not fair because you take all the benefit and therefore you take the responsibility as well. Otherwise you're a hypocrite and you're being selective. All right, so that said, have you guys ever seen the privilege walk? You have, you just don't know it as a privilege walk. They line a bunch of kids up, mixed races, and they say, take 2 steps forward if you've never feared for your life when encountering the police. Take 2 steps forward if your family never lived on food stamps. Take 2 steps forward if you never had to, if you never got people discriminating against you because of the color of your skin. And then by the time they're finished with the privilege walk, all the white kids in polo shirts are 10 steps ahead of everybody else, and it's a 15-step race. And then they say go, and obviously the black kids and the Mexican kids are back here. Usually the black kids are like way back, and the Mexican kids are kind of half back, but the white kids are so advantaged that the 5 steps that's left in the race, there's no way they're not going to win the race. And then when they make kids do this, and they say go, win $100, you win the race, the white kids usually refuse to like walk forward. And it's like everybody gets it, that they've been privileged. It's a privilege walk. You guys remember it now? It's called the privilege walk. It has different iterations, but that's the basic form of it. I don't like the privilege walk experiment. I like the concept of white privilege. Meaning, I don't, no, maybe I misstated. Thank you for laughing at me. I understand and agree with the concept of privileges. You're privileged if you got both your parents. You're privileged if you're born in this fair nation. You're privileged over people born in this nation of color if you're born white in this nation. You're privileged statistically over people who don't have these things. So I think that what I don't like is turning it into a race where it's a zero-sum game and one person wins and the other person doesn't win. Because I don't think life is a game where one person wins and the other person doesn't win. And I think if you are born with privilege and you still run a good race and you run 100 yards and you work hard, you get credit for that. Somebody else might be starting behind you and they might work hard and they also get credit for running forward. And if you don't judge it as a zero-sum game where there's one winner and one loser, which actually isn't how life works, then you get credit for working hard. Even if you started, you can still work harder than everybody else. It's not that if you're white, you're not allowed to work hard. And anything you do doesn't count because you're forever tarnished by your white skin. And the best thing you do is live a life filled with guilt and handicap yourself. That's what happens when they do the race. The white people all handicapped, they refuse to walk. So it's like that's what you're supposed to do. And there's a cancel culture, and if you don't do it right on social media and demonstrate enough guilt and shame on a regular basis on Instagram, then people will stalk and hunt you. Usually other white people. And they'll build up their credentials by showing that they're like more woke than you are. And like somehow the world's turned into that. I don't agree with that. I agree with the concept of white privilege and that it carries with it responsibility to help other people less fortunate than yourselves and to flatten the curve and to pull people along with you. Now you can say, whoa, who do you think you can pull anybody along and steward anybody? That's super patriarchal. Yeah, you can't have it both ways, buddy. You want to talk about my privilege, then that gives me a responsibility to help you out. You want to then say, I can't admit I'm helping you out, then stop talking about my privilege. You can't have it both ways. Do you follow? Did you follow the argument I just made? I'm getting kind of edgy now, but I've warmed up, and here's where we're going. If you want to talk about white privilege, I'm not going to interpret that to mean I should handicap myself. That's ridiculous. I will, however, take responsibility for helping those less fortunate than myself. I won't pretend like I didn't work or try, or that I'm fundamentally less than somebody. I mean, yeah, my good genes. What are you going to do? Like run around, like make yourself less athletic than you naturally are? Make yourself uglier than you naturally are? Like you're handsome, so you should like scar yourself up, like to make it more fair for people who aren't genetically gifted. Everybody get dealt a hand. You're in the U.S., hey dude, you won the lottery compared to like most of the rest of the world. You're in the U.S., you're in the top like 15%. Automatically. 20%. You already won. You're privileged. Ridiculously privileged. We're bummed about social justice. Other people can't eat. Learn your hierarchy of needs from Maslow. People are trying to eat and get water to drink. They could care less about social justice. They're actually just trying not to starve. You got 2 million sex slaves, 20 million human traffic slaves, 3 million kids dying every year of starvation, 10 million people dying a year of starvation. 10 million people just in Yemen on the verge of starvation. In one country. Social justice, it's like, man, that's like a rich person's problem. That's like a privileged person's problem. You've all got some privilege. You've all got some demerits. You've all got some good and some bad going on. You come in this country, you want to take benefits of our social contract that you get from coming to this country, take the responsibility of uplifting other people. Don't make it into a negative morality where you got to feel bad about your privilege. Make it into a positive morality where you're encouraged to take responsibility and pull people up. If that sounds patriarchal, tough luck. If you want to talk about responsibilities for people of privilege, it carries with it some sense of stewardship, some sense of giving people a leg up, some sense of affirmative action to help people out. I don't believe in a negative morality where somehow or other you show your wokeness by feeling guilty online, as if that like has some kind of incredible depth to it, and then hate on people who don't like haven't learned this week's language. How am I doing as far as time goes?
You still have some minutes.
It's just like I haven't even started yet. I got a whole other thing I want to get into about that everybody's racist. Everybody. Because racist is really just saying you're biased. And somehow the word racist means you're like an evil Ku Klux Klan member who lynches people for pleasure, like on weekends. And so everybody's like, I'm anti-racist, I'm non-racist. Actually, you're all racist, black people included. And if you want to say you can't be racist unless there's this idea, this preposterous idea, that you can't be racist unless you're part of the majority. Racism is systemic. That's not true. Systemic racism is systemic. Individual racism is individual. If a black person goes out and shoots a white person because they're white, that's a hate crime. If they say, I shot him because he's white and I hate whitey, he's not racist? Give me a break. And if a bunch of black people together and kill a bunch of white people, that's collective racism. Until such people come into power, it's not systemic. It's not policy racism. And racism is oftentimes, even without an action, can just be an attitude. A lot of times we talk about people being racist just because of their attitude. And so certainly that can be done on an individual basis. Everybody's racist. We need to demote that term as, instead of being a death knell, that if you admit to it, you're the most evil person in the world. We need to look at racists more along the ways we would look at unfair bias. And as you grow up and you learn not to be unfairly biased against people, because you realize that the stereotypes you make, which are natural, because you got to stereotype the world in order to survive. Mammals generalize and stereotype. It's why optical illusions work, because our brain processes information in chunks. We don't read individual letters. We read groups of letters together. You know that test they do online where it says if you can read this and it's all jumbled up, then you're brilliant? It's actually not true. Everybody can read it. It's just a joke. It's just a clickbait. If you think it makes you smart, that means you're stupid. We don't look at individual letters. We look at groups of letters together. That's how we learn. We generalize things. That's how we survive. We notice patterns. Optical illusions work because they interrupt a pattern, but your brain can't function and process the interruption of the pattern because you're made to look at patterns, so you see the pattern even when it's not there, and that's how optical illusions work. Stereotyping and profiling is the most natural thing in the world. It's how you learn to survive. It's why it's on your driver's license. Race genotype doesn't even match up with phenotype, with the way we look. Our genetics don't even match up with the way we look. Some people have the same genes, they look totally different. Some people who look the same have very different gene pools. Race and genetic structure, they don't even match up. Our phenotype and our genotype don't even match up clean. But it works because it's an easy way to look around and categorize things. And we're made to see patterns because it's how mammals survive. It's how higher cognitive functioning entities, including the animal world, survive. But when you start judging people collectively and you don't let the individual be themselves, that becomes biased, unfairly biased, what we know as racist. Remember the kulaks, the good farmers? They weren't necessarily bad people, but they got called bad people. They got all lumped together because they were good farmers and they were able to, in the cottage industry, do a little better. They were still peasants, but they were a little better off. They got killed, and then 10 million people died from the starvation. Millions of them died, and then millions more died because they weren't producing grains, and there was this artificial drought. This artificial famine that happened in Russia because people couldn't farm properly because they killed all the really good farmers. If you want to condemn white people as a class for being privileged, that's racism. It's the cleanest form of racism. It's like as clean as you get. We got to learn to judge people as individuals. And we have to start to recognize our own biases. And we got to clean them up. And we got to create a culture where it's not wrong to miss something. It's not wrong to have an outdated mode of thinking. It's not wrong to look at things wrong and educate yourself. In the same way you go to college, you go to high school, or whatever you do, and you learn new ways of looking at the world and the proper way of spelling words and the proper way to do math. You know, my son asked me to help him with his math homework. And it's like, there's that order of operations. What's the acronym for the order of operations? What is it? PEMDAS. I didn't even know that. I'm like such an idiot. I didn't even know PEMDAS. I don't even remember learning it in school. And so my son had a problem because he was applying PEMDAS. I had to realize that actually within addition and subtraction, addition goes first and subtraction goes next, and then you do that from right to left. And within multiplication and division, multiplication goes first, and you do that from left to right. And so it's like, it's not just PEMDAS where you go, the P is parentheses, and then the don't help me. I said don't help me. They're deaf. And then E is exponentials, and then M is multiplication, D is division, A is addition, and S is subtraction. And so you go through that order, but you don't go through that order just naturally. You go through that order left to right and right to left, and it's not all done one after another. But subtraction and addition, subtraction could come first if it was more to the right and you're moving to the left. All of you guys know this because you have half a brain. I don't. I'm an ignorant fool, and so I don't even know this. We all have things we don't know. We should look at our biases in the same way. And we should grow up and not have it be a bad thing. We should walk this razor's edge between having some sense of identity and not apologizing for the hand we were dealt, and not thinking that the right thing to do is to walk around feeling guilty and sandbagging yourself and crippling yourself. At the same time, we should have responsibility for bringing other people up without judging them. Save and accept to realize we need to bring them up. We should understand that noticing patterns is the most normal thing in the world, and generalizing, and everybody in that sense is racist. And we should just grow and grow up and learn not to judge a whole group of people by the actions of some or even most of them, but to judge people individually. Anyway, the Gita, the verse I was going to read, it's a verse that said, Ya antar sukhi, one who's happy within themselves, antar themselves. At the same time, that person, sarva bhuta hite rata, he engages in helping other people. And so I found in the Gita, in two subsequent verses, these two ideas juxtapositioned really nicely. Where on one hand, you become self-satisfied with where you're at, you define yourself on your own terms, you move forward in your own life, you live a good, and you're unapologetic about that, and you can be proud of that, you can feel good about that. And you find your happiness within, and you're not looking outside yourself for approval by others, and you're also not defining yourself by other people's situations. And so on one hand, the Gita speaks about this incredible autonomy, and at the same time, right afterwards, it posits sarva bhuta hite rata, that you have to help other people. And I think that's nice. I really like this, that philanthropy is woven into the text of the Gita, helping people less fortunate than yourself, helping to bring people up, some sense of social responsibility for your own autonomy, but also for helping other people. I think that juxtapositioning, that walking that razor's edge, that fine line is really powerful. Does that make sense? I'll say it one more time. We need to have some autonomy spiritually. We need to find self-realization. We also need to have some autonomy in this world. And we need to run the race of life, not competing with other people, but just moving forward on this great journey. And we should be grateful for the privilege that we have from being in the U.S., if we're from a non-broken family, for whatever good things have happened in our life. We should also be grateful for the bad stuff, because it's also an incredible teacher. And we should get better. And we should deal with our biases and not think that having some chink in your armor means you're a piece of crap. And we should cancel the cancer. It makes it impossible to be anything less than perfect. And you see everybody just learning the art of feeling guilty publicly. It's really gratuitous, amazing, and that might look different depending on where you landed, where you started, genetically, athletically, intellectually, societally, racially, and we should judge people by how far at some absolute point. Therefore, I don't like the privilege walk. At the same time, there by the grace of God go I, and we should help people. And in the same way we want a leg up and we want a little bit of help if we needed it, we should help other people. And we should live in a culture where we glorify that and we see that as a noble thing to help other people. And we don't have to apologize for that either. And we can help people and see when we're further along in life and bring people up with us. And that juxtaposition of autonomy and social responsibility, I think is incredibly powerful. And amazingly, it mirrors Krishna's own words. He says, I'm telling you this to uplift you because I love you. And so this idea that we have a responsibility, sarvabhuta hite, means to help other people. It means rata, you're engaged or you're attached, hite, in helping other people. It's in the locative and declension in Sanskrit grammar. You're engaged in helping other people. And Krishna says, tato vakshami tehita. I'm speaking this for your benefit, to help you. The same word, hitaya. Sarvabhuta, what is it? Ishtosi mijatamiti. Tato vakshami tehitaha. The same word. For your benefit, to uplift you, I'm speaking this. And so it's amazing, but Krishna loves us so much that he doesn't compromise our free will. He doesn't run the race for us. He doesn't take away. It's not a monergistic world where we have no ability to uplift ourselves, or where all the responsibility is on one person, on God. We live in a synergistic world where we have to do our part and God does his part. But we also live in a world where Krishna is really stacking the deck in our favor, and he's trying to help us without compromising our free will. And we need to have that same sense of social responsibility for our fellow men and women, and ultimately even for animals, at least to let them live. And we need to have it around the world, and also within our own country, in our own backyard. And we should uplift people whenever we can. And that model comes from Krishna himself, who's uplifting us without compromising our free will or taking responsibility for us. And we live in a synergistic world here, and it's even a synergistic world from God's perspective. Anyway, these are some of the things I was thinking about. These are the verses that came to mind, but I want to give you guys some background so you'll be able to appreciate kind of how I was viewing the verses. How are we doing? How much time we got left? 5 minutes? Wow, jeez. I thought you were saying 5 seconds. I was like, I was rushing like crazy. Okay, no, good, okay. Fantastic. So I'll just say it one more time. I got a couple of minutes left, which I never have. I see Krishna helping me, speaking the Gita, blessing me, even through my karma, and giving me these amazing opportunities to learn, but not learning for me. Helping me as my mother and father, picking me up, giving me every opportunity for my benefit because he loves me. Krishna literally says that, because I love you, I'm speaking this for your benefit. And therefore, to appreciate that and be grateful for what I've been given, I need to engage in benefiting other people. I need to pay it forward. I need to pull people up. And that's a good thing. And we should do it with our neighbors, and we should do it around the world too. Charity starts at home, but there's no reason why we have to think globally and act locally. We should also act globally. We should help these suffering people in Yemen. It's not just myopically about what's going on here. And don't think that by helping people here, you're going to help the people in Yemen. That's like the same logic that used to be behind slavery. It's like somehow you're the master race, and by helping you, it's going to uplift everybody else. Don't do that. It's like the Republican thing too. We're going to help all the job creators, and like give them no taxes, and then they're going to give you jobs, like have no oversight on them. Don't play that game. I actually have 1 minute left. Oh, great. I was ready for a 5 minute. Now I got 1 minute. So Krishna helps us. We should then emulate that and help other people. But we shouldn't do that with the sacrifice of our sense of autonomy and our sense of personal responsibility. And we don't need to do so with a bunch of guilt. We can do so with a